Welcome to our deep dive into China's incredible economic boom.
Yeah.
We're tackling some fascinating IMF research you provided.
Uh-huh.
And honestly, the sheer scale of China's growth is just mind-boggling.
It really is.
Your main focus is on how they pulled off such rapid growth
All right.
after 1978.
That's right. Yeah, it's a period of immense change and economic expansion, really,
Yeah.
that has intrigued economists, for decades, really.
And get this, it wasn't just about building factories and infrastructure.
Right.
It turns out a massive productivity boom was a major factor,
Absolutely.
which, from what I've read so far, is pretty unusual.
It is, yeah. It challenges some traditional economic theories
Okay.
and highlights the unique aspects of China's development path.
Okay, so before we dive into the how, let's just take a moment to appreciate the wow factor.
Right.
We're talking an average annual growth rate of 9% after 1978.
Right.
That dwarfs their pre-1978 rate of 6%.
Yeah.
And even the Asian tigers only managed around 7–8%
Right.
during that time. To put that in perspective, imagine your savings account suddenly earning interest at 3 times the usual rate.
Yeah.
That's the kind of economic acceleration we're talking about.
It's not just abstract numbers either.
Right.
This growth translated into a dramatic improvement in living standards.
Okay.
Per capita income nearly quadrupled in just 15 years.
Wow.
Think about the transformative impact that had on people's lives.
Yeah.
Widespread poverty to a burgeoning middle class
Right.
in a remarkably short period of time.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It's like hitting the fast forward button on economic development.
It is.
But how did they achieve such a dramatic shift?
Right.
The IMF study used a model called
Yeah.
the neoclassical economic model to analyze the data.
Okay.
Now, I know that sounds a bit technical,
Uh-huh.
but bear with us for a moment.
Well, think of it like this. You're interested in baking, right?
Yeah.
The neoclassical model is like a recipe.
Okay.
It tells us that to bake a cake, you need certain ingredients like flour, sugar, and eggs in specific proportions.
Right.
In economics, these ingredients are capital, labor, and technology.
So China had all the ingredients.
Yeah.
Massive capital investment pouring in, a huge labor force.
Right.
And increasing access to technology.
Yeah.
But they didn't see the expected outcome, did they?
Exactly. Typically, when you invest more capital,
Okay.
you'd expect to see capital deepening, meaning that each unit of capital becomes more productive.
Right.
But in China's case, despite the massive investments, production per unit of capital remained relatively stable.
So it wasn't just about throwing money at the problem.
Right.
They needed something else to make those investments truly effective.
Precisely. That's where productivity comes in. Productivity measures how efficiently workers are using those resources.
Okay.
And here's the fascinating part. Productivity skyrocketed after 1978,
Okay.
become the primary engine of China's economic growth.
That's so interesting. It almost seems counterintuitive. Wouldn't you expect capital investment to be the main driver, especially given the sheer scale of investments China was making?
You would, in a typical scenario.
Right.
But China's case defied those expectations.
Yeah.
It seems that something else was unlocking this incredible surge in productivity. And that something seems to point back to a pivotal year, 1978.
1978. The year China started to embrace market-oriented reforms.
Right.
We're talking about introducing profit incentives, relaxing state control,
Yeah.
and encouraging private businesses.
Right.
It was a dramatic shift, almost like flipping a switch and changing the entire operating system of the economy.
And the impact was most profound in rural areas.
Okay.
Imagine this. Before 1978, 80% of China's population worked in agriculture. By 1994, that number had plummeted to 50%.
Wow.
These reforms weren't just tweaking the system.
Right.
They were fundamentally reshaping the economic landscape, particularly in rural communities.
So these reforms weren't just about building shiny new factories and cities. They were about transforming the very foundation of the economy, starting in the countryside.
Yes.
Did this focus on rural areas play a significant role in the productivity boom?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Reforms led to more productive farms, a surge in rural businesses,
Okay.
and millions migrating from agriculture to higher value jobs in other sectors.
So it's like China suddenly unlocked
Yeah.
a hidden reservoir of human potential and economic energy.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got this massive productivity boom fueled by market reforms. But what does that actually look like on the ground? How did these abstract policy changes
Right.
translate into tangible improvements in people's lives?
Well, imagine you're a farmer who suddenly has the freedom to sell your crops at a profit.
Okay.
instead of handing them over to the state at fixed prices.
Right.
Or picture a village entrepreneur
Uh,
who can now open a small business without facing stifling bureaucracy.
right.
These reforms were all about changing incentives, empowering individuals,
Okay.
and unleashing the entrepreneurial spirit of a nation.
It's like they were removing the shackles and letting people run free, economically speaking.
Exactly.
And then there's the famous open door policy. Suddenly, foreign investments started pouring in, building factories, creating jobs, and bringing new technology into the mix.
Yes, the open door policy was a game changer. It's like China plugged itself into the global economic network,
Okay.
accessing new markets, capital, and expertise.
Yeah.
And the results were remarkable.
Yeah.
Export growth soared by an average of 19% annually
Wow.
between 1981 and 1994, further boosting productivity in domestic industries.
So it's like a chain reaction.
Yeah.
Market reforms ignite productivity. Foreign investment pours in,
Right.
exports skyrocket.
Right.
And the entire economy starts humming at a new pace.
Exactly.
But before we get too carried away with the success story, I'm curious about the IMF studies analysis.
Right.
Were there any alternative explanations
Oh, yeah.
for this growth spurt that they considered?
Absolutely. The IMF researchers were thorough in their analysis and explored several factors
Oh,
that could have potentially skewed the results. For example, they examined whether political instability before 1978.
that's a great point.
Yeah.
I mean, the years leading up to those reforms were certainly tumultuous.
They were.
Could those pre-existing conditions
Right.
have inflated the perceived impact of the reforms?
That's a valid question.
Mhm.
However, even after adjusting for those potentially distorting factors, the productivity jump remained significant.
Okay.
It wasn't just a statistical illusion.
Right.
They also investigated whether these gains were sustainable
Okay.
or just a temporary blip on the radar.
So was this a fleeting moment of economic brilliance?
Right.
Or were these changes truly transformative and enduring? Did the IMF study shed any light on that?
The evidence suggests it was the latter. Productivity growth remained remarkably consistent throughout this period.
Okay.
And even accelerated in the 1990s. This wasn't a fluke. It was a sustained trend pointing to deep-rooted changes in the economy.
Okay, so we've established that this productivity boom is the real deal.
Yeah.
But I think it's time to ask the so what question.
Right.
What does this all mean for the rest of the world? What are the key takeaways
Right.
from China's remarkable journey?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? On a fundamental level, China's experience demonstrates that while capital investment is essential for growth,
Yeah.
it's far more potent when paired with market-oriented reforms that unlock productivity and incentivize innovation.
So it's not just about having the right ingredients.
Right.
It's about creating the right recipe, the right environment for those ingredients to combine effectively and produce something truly extraordinary.
Exactly. And the focus on rural enterprise development is a particularly intriguing model.
Okay.
It shows that economic transformation doesn't have to follow a rigid path
Right.
of urbanization-driven growth.
It's like a whole new playbook for economic development.
Yeah.
And one that could hold valuable lessons for other countries with large agricultural populations.
Absolute.
But China's story is more than just economics, isn't it?
It is.
There's a whole other layer of cultural and political factors that played a role. Right.
Absolutely. To fully grasp the nuances of China's economic miracle,
Yeah.
we need to delve into those cultural and political dimensions.
Okay.
That's where things get really interesting.
I'm ready to dive deeper. Let's explore those cultural and political factors that might have contributed to this remarkable story in our next segment.
Okay, welcome back. It's fascinating to consider how cultural and political factors might have intertwined with the economic reforms we discussed.
Yeah, it's like the difference between having a great blueprint for a house and actually building it on solid ground. You need the right foundation for it all to work.
Exactly. One aspect that really stands out is China's long history of centralized governance.
Okay.
There's a strong emphasis on national unity, and this might have actually helped implement those top-down market reforms in a way that wouldn't have been possible in a more decentralized or fragmented society.
Interesting. But wouldn't that same centralized system also be more resistant to change in the first place? It seems counterintuitive that a top-down structure would be so effective at driving such radical changes.
It is, yeah. It's a bit of a paradox for sure.
Yeah.
But in China's case, it seems that once the decision was made to embrace reforms,
Right.
the government's ability to mobilize resources and direct investment played a crucial role in their success.
Mm.
Imagine trying to turn a giant ship.
Okay.
It takes a lot of coordinated effort,
Mhm.
but once it starts moving in a new direction, it gains momentum quickly.
So a top-down approach can be both a barrier and an accelerator,
Yeah.
depending on the direction the leadership wants to go. It's like having a powerful engine.
Right.
It can propel you forward at incredible speed, but if you're not careful, it can also lead to a spectacular crash.
Precisely.
Mm.
Now, another crucial factor is the cultural aspect.
Mm-hmm.
China has a long tradition of a strong work ethic and a deep respect for education. These values have been ingrained in society for centuries.
So you're saying that even with the economic incentives in place,
Right.
you still need a workforce that's motivated and capable of taking advantage of those opportunities. It's like having all the tools and materials for a construction project.
Yeah.
But without skilled workers, you won't get very far.
Exactly. Think about those millions of people moving from agriculture to manufacturing and other industries. Their willingness to learn new skills and adapt to new environments was essential for China's productivity boom. It wasn't just about moving bodies.
Right.
It was about harnessing the energy and ambition of a population eager to improve their lives.
It's like having fertile ground ready to receive the seeds of economic growth.
Exactly.
The reforms provided the opportunity, but the cultural foundation determined how effectively those opportunities could be harnessed. It reminds me of that saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
That's a great analogy.
Oh.
And let's not forget about the role of pragmatism in Chinese policymaking. They've been remarkably flexible and adaptive, willing to experiment and adjust their approach as needed. It's not about rigidly adhering to ideology.
Right.
It's about finding what works.
It's like that famous quote attributed to Deng Xiaoping. It doesn't matter if a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice.
Yeah.
They were focused on results, not dogmas.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And that pragmatism allowed them to navigate some pretty complex challenges like managing the transition from a centrally planned to a more market-driven economy without completely derailing the whole system.
That's a delicate balancing act for sure. You hear all these stories about the chaos and uncertainty during those early years of reform. It must have been a wild ride.
It wasn't a smooth journey, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But they managed to keep the ship steady enough to avoid capsizing, and that's partly because they weren't afraid to make adjustments along the way.
It's like navigating a ship through uncharted waters.
Exactly.
You need a steady hand on the wheel, but also the flexibility to adjust course when you encounter unexpected currents or obstacles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have this intriguing mix of top-down control, strong cultural values, and pragmatic policymaking. It seems like a pretty unique recipe for success.
It does. But this raises a really important question. To what extent can China's experience be replicated elsewhere? Other countries looking to achieve similar economic growth are surely studying China's model closely.
Right, the million-dollar question. Everyone wants to know the secret formula for replicating China's economic miracle. But the reality is there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Every country has its own unique historical, cultural, and political context.
So blindly copying China's policies without understanding the underlying conditions that made them successful is probably a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. It's like trying to transplant a tree without considering the soil and climate it needs to thrive.
Yeah.
What worked in China might not work somewhere else, and vice versa.
So what are the key takeaways here for other countries looking to learn from China's experience?
Right.
They can't just copy and paste China's policies. What are the broader lessons they should be paying attention to?
Well, I think the most important lesson is that economic development is not just about technical solutions or policy prescriptions. It's about understanding the complex interplay of economic, social, and political factors. It's about recognizing that each country has its own unique set of circumstances and that there's no magic bullet.
It's about seeing the whole ecosystem, not just the individual trees. It's about understanding the web of interconnected factors that contribute to a nation's economic success.
Precisely. And it's about being willing to experiment, adapt, and learn from both successes and failures.
Okay.
There's no magic formula, but there are valuable lessons to be learned from those who have navigated this complex terrain successfully.
This has been an incredibly thought-provoking discussion. We've gone from marveling at China's growth to understanding the intricate web of factors that contributed to its success. And now we're grappling with the question of what it all means for the rest of the world.
It's a reminder that even the most impressive economic transformations are the result of a complex interplay of forces, both internal and external. And as China continues to evolve, its impact on the global stage will only grow.
Absolutely. But we're not done yet. We've explored the how and the why of China's rise.
Right.
But now it's time to look ahead. What are the potential challenges and opportunities that lie ahead for China?
Yeah.
And what does its continued growth mean for the rest of the world?
Yeah.
That's what we'll be tackling in our final segment. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive. We've explored how China achieved its remarkable economic growth and all the complex factors that contributed to its success. But now it's time to look ahead. What's next for China? And perhaps even more importantly, what does its continued rise mean for the rest of the world?
Those are the billion-dollar questions indeed. And like any good economist, I have to say, it depends. China faces a number of challenges as it transitions to a more mature and complex economy. It's like reaching a certain altitude on a mountain climb. The air gets thinner, the terrain gets steeper, and the challenges become more demanding.
Okay, so what are some of those challenges? What potential roadblocks lie ahead on China's path?
Well, for starters, they're grappling with a classic middle-income trap.
Yeah.
This is where countries that have achieved a certain level of development struggle to make the leap to high-income status. They kind of hit a plateau in their growth trajectory. Think of it like a company that's been successful with one product but now needs to innovate to stay competitive.
So how does China avoid getting stuck on that plateau? What's the recipe for reaching the economic summit?
It requires a strategic shift from relying primarily on low-cost manufacturing and exports to fostering innovation, developing a more knowledge-based economy, and boosting domestic consumption. It's about moving from made in China to innovated in China.
So it's about climbing higher up the value chain, right? Not just assembling products, but designing and creating the cutting-edge technologies and products that everyone wants. But isn't that easier said than done?
Absolutely. And the IMF study highlights some key areas where China needs to focus. For example, investing heavily in research and development is crucial. Think about the race to develop artificial intelligence, renewable energy technologies, and advanced biotech. That's where the future lies, and China needs to be at the forefront.
So it's about fostering a culture of creativity and innovation. But can China successfully make this transition while maintaining its current political system? Or will it need to embrace more political and economic liberalization to unleash the full potential of its people? It's a tricky balance, isn't it?
It is, and that's one of the big questions hanging over China's future. Can they achieve a more open and innovative economy without compromising political stability? The IMF research doesn't offer any definitive answers, but it does suggest that striking the right balance between control and freedom will be crucial.
It's like walking a tightrope. One wrong step, and the whole system could become unbalanced. And then there are the demographic challenges. China's population is aging rapidly, and its one-child policy, while recently relaxed, has created a shrinking workforce. It's like having a team with fewer players on the field.
Right. A shrinking workforce means slower economic growth unless productivity increases significantly. So China needs to find ways to boost productivity even further, perhaps through automation and technological advancements. They need to work smarter, not harder.
It's like needing to get more juice out of a shrinking orange. Okay, so those are some pretty significant hurdles to overcome. But what about the opportunities? Where does China see its future on the global stage?
Well, despite those challenges, China still has tremendous potential. They have a massive domestic market, a growing middle class with increasing purchasing power, and a government committed to investing in infrastructure and technology.
So it's like a giant ship that might be slowing down a bit, but still has a lot of momentum. What direction is that ship heading in?
They're strategically positioning themselves to be a global leader in key areas like artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and space exploration. Think about the implications of China becoming the dominant player in these fields. It would reshape the geopolitical landscape in profound ways.
Wow, so they're not just playing catch-up anymore. They're aiming to set the pace and shape the future. That brings us to the big question for the rest of the world. What does China's continued rise mean for the existing global order?
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it? Is this a win-win situation where everyone benefits from China's growth, or are we heading towards a more competitive and potentially conflict-ridden future?
Yeah, that's the part that everyone's trying to figure out. Will China's rise lead to greater global prosperity or increased geopolitical tensions?
It's impossible to say for sure, but one thing is clear. China's growing economic and political clout will inevitably reshape the global landscape. The IMF research emphasizes the need for the international community to understand and engage with China constructively, to find ways to cooperate on shared challenges like climate change and global economic stability.
So we're all going to have to learn how to dance with this new giant on the dance floor.
Precisely. And that requires understanding China's motivations, its strengths, its weaknesses. It requires dialogue, cooperation, and a willingness to find common ground. It's a complex and evolving relationship, one that will define the 21st century in many ways.
This has been an incredible journey. We started by marveling at China's economic growth, then explored the factors behind it, and now we're contemplating its future impact on the world. It's safe to say we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. It's a story that's still being written, and we'll all be watching closely to see how it unfolds.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of China's economic boom. We hope this has given you some valuable insights and maybe even sparked some new questions of your own.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot to think about.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and the curiosity flowing.